The whole financial literacy thing started because in my personal journey, I started, wanting to learn about financial literacy myself because I never learned it. I trashed my credit when I was young. I mean, it was awful. And I was like, something's got to change. So I joined a community of real estate investors, and an epiphany happened for me where I realized that I learned more with them in a year or two than I did in 25 years of my life. There's another aspect to it too, by the way, is keeping them engaged. Because here's the thing, and we're all probably guilty of this, especially when we're like, work meetings and stuff like that. You are on the computer. They are on the computer, which means they have access to everything on the computer. So they could be doing 1,000 other things instead of paying attention to you. So you have to be able to grasp their attention and bring them back, if need be, or just keep them there. That can be very challenging. I discovered very quickly that being an actor does not make any money at first. It is really hard to make money at first. And then a few weeks later, I get a letter from the IRS saying, hey, you owe us $1,000.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Hello and welcome to the 130th episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. My name is Ludo Miller, the host of this podcast. Welcome back to our regular listeners. Welcome to any of you for whom this is your first time listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. And of course, a very warm welcome to our guest today, Isabel De La Cruz. Isabel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
And it's an honor for us to receive you here as well. It's been many months that we have known each other, and it's really on me that I haven't invited you onto the podcast sooner. So I'm very glad that you're here for the first of hopefully many podcasts that we're able to do with you, Isabel. So as a little background to Isabel, because I know many of the people in our community will have come across Isabel's videos and Isabel's financial literacy courses. But for those who haven't, and I've just given away a little bit about what Isabel does, but Isabel is an amazing science and math tutor of coming up to about 15 years now. Is it, Isabel?
Something like that, yeah. Well, I technically started back in 2008, but I didn't start tutoring full-time until 2014. So that's a pretty cool story that I'll tell you in a minute.
Yeah, so definitely 15 years and full time for the last 9 or 10. Isabel has a background in molecular biology and computer programming and maths, and in addition to all of that, is a super talented vlogger and YouTuber and actor. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. So many of you will have heard of Isabel Explains, which is Isabel's YouTube channel for financial literacy, where she shares short, kind of snappy videos explaining all kinds of banking, accounting, mathematical and finance concepts. Really, really easy and informative watching for you, the educator, for your children, if you have any, and for your students as well. And much like our guest from 2 weeks ago, Matthew Kernier, Isabel has, as I mentioned, also starred in many acting roles in film and in TV. So I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that. Though this is, of course, the Qualified Tutor podcast. So unfortunately, most of this episode will be about Isabel's tutoring knowledge and expertise, but we will, I'm sure, touch on the acting bit a little bit. But Isabel, I asked you a few weeks ago to see if you could find or locate any old school reports, because it's a great way for our listeners to get to know our guests. I gather that locating the school reports was not necessarily possible, but you do have a tale from your childhood days. Is that right?
Yes. So when I was in 11th grade, we were reading this book called Como Agua para Chocolate. I grew up in Puerto Rico, so I went to school in Puerto Rico. And this book is basically, it's a story, it's a novel. And as part of our one of our projects was to literally become the character. You were assigned to be one of the characters of the book, and we were going to have a judgment of the character. Like, we'll literally go to court and defend our character. And I got so into it. Like, my character was supposed to be like a military person. Like, she kind of like just joined the militia or whatever out of the blue, like in a whim. And my dad was in the military, so I borrowed one of his shirts. I made fake guns. Like, I was all in. And the presentation was going great. And at some point I said something very inappropriate. And the teacher just stopped, and she was like, okay, that is a cut. So, but she said, and I will never forget this, because I think this is probably what led me to becoming an actor, or, getting some hope about becoming an actor. She said, we got to stop here because that was inappropriate, but I will tell you, you are a thespian. You definitely are a thespian. So I loved it. I loved everything you did. It was just not appropriate for the classroom.
50% no, 50% yes.
Yeah, but I still got an A.
Maybe one day we'll hear what you said, but perhaps not now, Isabel.
No.
So do you think then that your experiences kind of at school and in drama have kind of led you to where you are today? Would you say that it informs your why, Isabel?
A little bit, yes. I think, well, I would say that my why to becoming a tutor is, for one thing, the aha moments. I absolutely love that. That is my favorite part of tutoring. Like, seeing their eyes just like when it clicks, that is magical to me. But I think that one thing that I have, and I guess it has grown over time, is learning that anyone can learn anything if they are taught in the way that they learn. I've come across so many students that have so many different ways of learning that has been very eye-opening for me, to where I can even pinpoint, like, okay, I think you're a kinetic learner, or you're an auditory learner, or you're a visual learner, or you're a mixture of these two, or kids who have, ADHD or things like that, and it's hilarious because I actually tutor online, and at the end of the day, at the end of the session, I would literally have a whole canvas of drawings throughout the entire board, because that's what they do to focus. And listen, as long as you understand the lesson and as long as you're getting good grades and everything, I truly don't care. And I actually save them, because some of them are actually very talented. And I literally just take screenshots and save them for myself, because it's just really cool.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of weird things that's cropped up with online learning, isn't it? That we now have these kind of beautiful depictions, these kind of flyers and posters that are just created almost kind of, subconsciously throughout the session. It's not like, okay, today we're going to make a beautiful poster about, some part of maths. It's just that's how the session kind of develops, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost artistic. I don't have an artistic bone in my body, but some of the creations I come up with, I'm quite impressed with. they're mostly my students' talent rather than mine. But I think that's. I remember us talking before about why you do what you do, and it's clearly a large part of your branding, your sell to parents, is that why, is that, wanting to see that joy in learning, and knowing that is part of how students learn effectively, is enjoying it. I can't imagine that any student who joins any of your financial literacy games or watches your YouTube videos doesn't find the content kind of engaging and attractive and interesting, which is really, really important. But you're also a tutoring business owner alongside that. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you came, if we go back a little bit, how you came to be involved in education and setting up your tutoring business?
Yeah, so that is the story I wanted to tell you. So I actually went to school for math at first. I was a math major. It was computational math, so it was actually math and computer science. And I did that for 3 years. And eventually, I ended up switching, long story short, to biology. I got my degree in molecular biology, but I always had this dream, I guess, of I wanted to become an actress. I always did. And, my upbringing, my dad is very traditional. So he was very like, no, you have a brain, you're going to use it. So go to school and get a degree. So when I was done, I basically just gave him my degree and I was like, I'm going to go be an actor now. And I started taking classes and whatnot. So I discovered very quickly that being an actor does not make any money at first. It is really hard to make money at first. So, because you have to do a lot of, free projects and show off your talent and whatnot. And that is very time consuming because even something as simple as a 10-minute video can take literally all day to shoot, So, I came across a friend who told me that she was doing tutoring and she loved it because she could make her own schedule and whatnot. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to give that a shot because I did tutor a lot when I was in high school and in college. I always tutored my peers, but I never did it like quote unquote professionally. I never charged anybody for it. So I started doing it and I fell in love with it. I loved it so much. And, over the years, I started realizing that teens was kind of like my niche, right? Like the ones that I got to teach the best, so, and that's where everything started rolling. And till this day, I absolutely love it. Now, the whole financial literacy thing started because in my personal journey, I started, wanting to learn about financial literacy myself because I never learned it, right? So it was very, very challenging for me. I trashed my credit when I was young. I mean, it was awful. I had stuff in my collections for forever. I mean, it was really, really bad. And I was like, something's got to change. Like I can't learn this. It can't be that hard. So I joined a community of real estate investors and an epiphany happened for me where I realized that I learned more with them in a year or two that I was actively part of the community than I did in 25 years of my life. And I was like, I have to share this. I have to share this with my students because had I known what I know now when I was their age, I would be a millionaire by now, So I started, sharing tidbits and whatnot during our sessions and whatever. And they were like, man, I wish I would learn that in school. Like, that's what they got to be teaching us, not this algebra 2 or, this pre-calculus. Like, I want to be a dentist. I don't need no pre-calculus, or whatever. And they're not necessarily wrong. So I took it up on myself and I actually did a lot of research, because I wanted to share a content with them. And I realized that most of the content out there is for adults. Is not for teens. There's very little content for teens. And I'm like, we gotta teach them while they're young before they start screwing up. That's what we need to do. So I took it upon myself and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make turn my YouTube channel that I already had, it was from math and science. I'm going to start doing financial literacy, and they love it. I have a whole course on Udemy as well. It is free at the moment, and I will hopefully be dropping lesson 2 by the end of this month. So yeah, it's been an awesome journey. As of last night, actually, or yesterday, technically, it was their night, but it was my morning yesterday. I ended up doing a financial literacy game with the kids from Ukraine, with Julia, your friend. So it was fantastic. It was so much fun, and they were so appreciative. You know, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like this is where real life is," and I'm like, "Yeah." You know, one of the things that happened that I think it was kind of like a blessing in disguise. One of the scenarios that I do for the game was that your cousin got into a really bad accident. You know, do you help them with their bills, or do you take them to the doctor and back, or whatever? You know, like, how do you help them? And one of the kids didn't. And I'm like poking fun at her, you know, kind of like, "Oh, you're such a bad person. How dare you not help your cousin?" You know? And, you know, it was all in good fun though. And at the end, when I got their feedback, she goes, "I couldn't help him because I didn't have enough money." And that spoke to my soul. Because I was like, that has actually happened to me, where I want to help somebody and I can't because I didn't have enough money, or I didn't have the means to go visit them and stay with them, whatever the case may be, you know? And I told her, it's like, and that's why you have to be responsible with your money, because you did all the partying up to this point, right? And now you don't have enough money to help your cousin, right? And yeah, so it was one of those lessons that I'm like,
moments, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I hope that stays with you forever.
So what do you know about financial literacy for teens now that you didn't at the start? What are some things that you could tell parents or educators of students about financial literacy that they, you know, that you didn't know when you first began this journey?
Well, I mean, you mean my personal journey or the journey of teaching them?
The journey of teaching them, yeah.
Well, I would say that one thing I didn't know was how little they actually knew, you know? So when I first started sharing tips with them, would be things like, "Oh, did you know you can save on taxes by opening a business?" And then I realized that they don't even know the difference between a debit card and a credit card. You know, like,
Essential.
Let's back up a little bit, you know? So I think that was a huge eye opener for me, because it's one of those things you don't necessarily think about. You know, when I was 15, I probably didn't know either, you know? So I think one thing that I have taken away from doing this is keep it incredibly simple and start from the basics. Don't assume that they know what you think they know, right? Like things, even like the difference between a checking account and a savings account. Most of them don't know, you know? So I think that is one thing that I would definitely encourage even parents. Like, you don't necessarily have to share any figures with them, because I understand that, you know, there's this privacy concept to it and whatnot. But even if it's just at least like a generic idea of, this is what a checking account is, and this is what a savings account is, or a credit card versus a debit card, and this is how you use it, and why this one is better than the other for whatever scenario, you know? Even things as like direct deposit or overdraft protection, you know, that is one thing that my students haven't even heard of. And it's crazy because I actually had an experience with overdraft protection that I didn't know what overdraft protection was. And here I was with my bank account in negative numbers, you know, and paying fees on top of that. And I was like, I was almost offended at the time, I remember, because I didn't know. And it's almost, it sounds silly, but it was almost humiliating, because I felt robbed, you know, in a way. But they had warned me ahead of time. I just didn't know what it was. And is one of those moments that you just feel so, for lack of a better word, so stupid, right? And you shouldn't, but I did. And I'm like, this is so unnecessary. All of this pain was so incredibly unnecessary.
Yeah.
Had I just known what overdraft was.
Yeah, it's almost a bit like some of the more classic classroom subjects, isn't it? You know, students often turn to tutoring for extra help because they just don't know what a topic is in a particular subject, and they feel like all the other students around them have grasped this concept, and they feel, as you say, almost a bit stupid that they don't know what the teacher's talking about. So it's not like financial literacy is this kind of completely unrelatable extracurricular activity. Actually, it has exactly the same tenets to the progressive learning that mainstream classroom subjects do, and yet it has such a practical application later in life. As soon as they leave college or university, they will be having to deal with things like overdraft protection, whereas unless they go into science, they probably won't be having to deal with color changes in chemistry, or the classification of animals in biology, or anything else that you learn at school. But I mean, you have your own tale about your own personal journey into, or perhaps a trigger into, wanting to learn more about financial literacy. I remember the first time we spoke about this. It was with the Inland Revenue system, wasn't it, in the US?
Oh yeah, the IRS. So yeah, that story is very. It's funny now. But yeah, one time I believe I was 23 at the time. I was already, I had graduated college. I was kind of on my own. And because I was a math major and a science major, I'm so smart, right? So I was like, you know what? This taxes thing can't be that hard. So I'm going to do my own taxes. I ain't paying nobody $500 to do my taxes. I'm going to do it with the software on my own, and I did. So I get a refund. I was very excited. I was like, yeah, I did it. And then a few weeks later, I get a letter from the IRS saying, hey, you owe us $1,000. And I'm like, what do you mean? And literally said something like, there was a section where you were supposed to only check one of the two boxes, and you checked both of them. And that simple mistake cost me $1,000 to pay back the IRS. And that was another trigger, like you're saying, where I was like, I have to learn about this stuff. There's no way. And I think that is a big problem, in the sense that a lot of people are afraid of the IRS, right? Everything is so complicated and so mysterious and whatnot. And I actually heard one of my students say recently that she's like, I'm scared of the IRS, like, you don't mess with the IRS. And I'm like, yes, true. But also, you don't need to be afraid of it, because if you learn about it, then you know what you're doing. The antidote to fear is knowledge, right? So just learn about it, because it can be complicated at times, but it's not that hard. Once you think of it in the bigger picture, which is how I like to teach, it's like, think of it as the bigger picture, and then start, jumping into the details. It's not as scary as it sounds at first.
Yeah, that's a great line to leave that part with. It's not as scary as it looks at first. No amount of learning is as scary, ends up being as scary as it looks at first. That's kind of the point of learning, isn't it? Going from that place of knowledge and confidence and trust, and taking that leap into the unknown, into somewhere that you as the learner, you don't know it yet, but with the help of a financial literacy course or a tutor or a teacher, you go from that place of unknown to known. So yeah, I thought that story was strikes a real chord, because not only might it save someone from having to pay £1,000 or dollars, but also I think it tells us a little bit more about how, with a semblance of understanding and knowledge, you can go a long way. Now, did mention that we'd get to your acting as well, Isabel. I'm afraid we don't have a huge segment for your acting. Perhaps we can focus on that primarily in another conversation. But you do have a background in acting, and we know from speaking to previous guests that can be a really effective tool in an educator's kind of toolkit. What transferable skills would you say you have been able to bring into education then from your acting?
I would say so much. Everything from like something as simple as reading their body language, when they tell me that they understand something, but their face doesn't. Or making, my classes more upbeat or fun, and being able even to speak on camera, right? Like with this whole Zoom world or, virtual world, being able to speak on camera. And it has definitely helped me a lot with my YouTube channel, right? And even creating my course, because my course is all videos as well. So yeah, it definitely has helped a lot, because simple things like even lighting or audio quality, that can make or break your video. And the fact that I have been able to learn all that as an actor, taking on camera classes and taping my own auditions and making sure that everything is well lit and, the microphone is plugged in, and how to make sure that the audio and the video match and all that stuff, the technical stuff has definitely helped a lot. But I would say in the sense of teaching as well, it has definitely improved my relationships with my students, because now I'm super cool, and
you got an interesting backstory. Yeah.
And but also, it's definitely helped in the sense, like I said, to be able to connect with them at a stronger level than just like, here's how you do this exercise. Do you get it? Yes, let's move on.
Yeah. Or maybe the two can be combined then, perhaps.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, especially as you say, and given that we are, kind of delivering performances online now, over Zoom. So many tutors are tutoring online. That's a kind of mini. I guess audition is perhaps not the right word, because there's not that level of stress or uncertainty in a tutoring situation, but it's not dissimilar, is it? I mean, the tutoring environment is kind of a performance in some ways. In lots of different meanings of that word.
And there's another aspect to it too, by the way, is keeping them engaged, because here's the thing, and we're all probably guilty of this, especially when we're like, work meetings and stuff like that. You are on the computer. They are on the computer, which means they have access to everything on the computer. So they could be doing 1,000 other things instead of paying attention to you. So you have to be able to grasp their attention and bring them back, if need be, or just keep them there. That can be very challenging sometimes, especially for students who are not very interested in the topic. But yeah, it helps when you actually make that connection with them, as opposed to, this is how you do it, blah, 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 and they just take a screenshot of it and move on.
Yeah, exactly. Now, finally, Isabel, because we do have to draw this conversation to a close. Unfortunately, we like turning on this podcast to the future plans of our guests, finding out a little bit more about what they'll be up to in the coming months and weeks and months. So what's next for you, Isabel? What's next for Isabel De La Cruz?
So first of all, I am going to be releasing lesson 2 of my financial literacy course on Udemy. As I mentioned, it is free right now, and you guys are all welcome to sign up. It is technically for teens, but anybody can learn from it. And if you sign up while it is free, it will be free to you forever. So even if I add content, the thing with Udemy is that they do not let me keep it for free after I add more than 2 hours of content. And since I plan on doing 11 whole lessons, everything from what is a bank account to retirement, investing, things like that. So you want to make sure you sign up, because there's a lot of content in there that I'm going to be posting in the next few months. And I also want to finish my financial literacy game, or I already finished it, but keep bringing it to schools and have more financial literacy game nights, which so far they have been very successful. My students are eating it up, and they enjoy it, because I try to make it fun and we joke about, life, but also they get to learn things about, what is a dividend, or what is, the difference between, like I said, checking and savings, or, how to use a credit card and things like that, and make it a little realistic.
It is wonderful work what you're doing, Isabel. And it's opening so many both tutors and obviously students' minds to financial literacy, which affects us all, or at least will affect us all in the case of young students. So it's really a very exciting space to watch. Isabel, thank you so much for joining us here today on the show. It's always a really, really fun conversation with you, Isabel. You add so much energy to this conversation. You can see how naturally that comes to you in a tutoring environment as well, or on the screen, I imagine. I haven't watched a film with you in it, Isabel, but that's my next piece of homework. So I hope you enjoyed coming on as well. If people want to reach out to you today, straight after they've listened to this, what's the best way they can get in touch?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure. And yes, I enjoyed this. This is really awesome. The easiest way, I would say, is go to my website, isabelexplains.com. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I even have a link tree where you can see a bunch of other stuff that I offer as well, like my course as well. And there's a bunch of books that I also recommend as well. They're all on my link tree, and everything is Isabel Explains. And that is ISABEL. There's no LLE. There's no A at the end. It's just Isabel, ISABEL Explains. So you can find me on any platform for the most part.
That's your next step, listeners. Thank you, listeners, for listening in today, for being with the show, for following the QT podcast. This has been our 130th episode, and there are still many, many more to come. But Isabel, for one final time, thank you very, very much, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Cheerio then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, join the Qualified Tutor podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor